Think we're on the air, man.
Okay. Good morning, Grinders. Sorry for the delay there. Welcome to another edition of the Leadoff Man. I'm DraftCheat, and I'm here with DFS legend, guillotine connoisseur, head chopper. What's going on, man?
Well, I'm only a legend in my own mind, dude.
Oh, I think you're more than that. Qualifier of many tournaments, of course. Snarky on Twitter. Everyone knows who you are, Chop, and it's good to have you back here on Grinders Live. I think it's been a few months. I think you, as far as I know, you sat the NBA season out as far as being on Grinders Live. Of course, you do good college football, NFL analysis, but really good to have you back. I know you're off to a pretty good start here in the baseball season, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts as it pertains to baseball. I know you're one guy that I think sometimes goes against the grain a little bit. You know, certain players, you kind of know what to expect from their teams. I never know what I'm going to see when I look at your teams, so it's always exciting, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get into it today, man. This is the kind of slate. I mean, this is, man, daily fantasy. This is what really drives you, man. Is when you can go out there in the morning time and by lunchtime you got all these games and you've got this serious action going, and then you've still got a whole nother clean slate tonight. You can start over and do it all over again. This is the stuff right here, man.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to ask you, do you like these kind of split slates? We got 5 games this morning. I don't know, maybe like 6 tonight or something like that. Do you like these days, or do you like them all at once?
Man, I love it when they break it down a little bit. I find, if we're doing all night like last night where you've got 15 games and you got to do 15 games all at one time. I mean, there's just so many guys you can choose from, that
Yeah.
sometimes it's a little overwhelming. And then when we break it up like this, and you can taper back on, and you can identify some guys who stand out above the rest. This is the best one. This is the best time right here. Whenever you've got two smaller slates going as opposed to one big one.
Yeah, it's definitely fun. As a full-time DFS player, I'm full-time. As far as I know, you are too. You get up early, you do your research. You jump on Grinders Live, make your teams. Then you get to watch the games while you kind of research. The late slate. So it's all. If you're really into DFS, I know I am. I think you are as well. It makes for a really fun day to kind of all-encompassing. Research, watch, research, and then watch again. And if you love baseball. You can't get enough of it, so you got to love it. With that, we'll jump right into starting pitching as we normally do. There's a ton of options on this early slate. Late slate's a different story, but we're gonna stick to the early games today. And there are several aces on the hill. I think there's a lot of ways you could go. Give me your thoughts on kind of who you're thinking for the top overall guys. We do have two, legit number one aces in Felix Hernandez and Steven Strasburg on the hill. Are you looking at either of those guys, or are you looking maybe to save some money elsewhere?
Well, when I looked at it, my initial thoughts were my number one guy is Strasburg. Anytime Strasburg is at home, he's got to be in consideration, no matter the opponent. However, when I'm putting together teams and I look at his price, he's probably not the guy I'm going to be taking the majority of the time this morning. He's so high up there, and the Dodgers always have the potential to get those big expensive bats going, and they can really ruin your whole day. So I'll probably veer away from him. Although if I'm making just a straight no salary, list, he's at the top. Felix I like a little bit better, even though he's just as expensive on the two major sites.
Yep.
But I like the matchup a little bit better. Oakland is a decent offensive team, but I like the big ballpark, and I don't know. Felix seems a little bit more consistent than Strasburg. Strasburg always seems to find those games where he just hands it to you, and you're burning your money when you take him. So if I'm going to choose between those two, I definitely won't be doing both of them on a roster on DraftKings. But if I have to choose between them, I'm going Felix. But more than likely, I'm staying away from those two big high-dollar guys. And there's a few guys out there much cheaper that I think can produce a lot better. Namely, I'm really like my number one guy with salary involved and everything is going to be James Shields.
Yeah.
I like Shields. I mean, it's a perfect. Anytime anybody goes into San Diego, they jump up on the list right away. And when you take Shields, and he has even though he hasn't shown it a whole lot this year, he's got the potential to strike out a lot of guys. San Diego at home, especially against right-handers, they're putrid, and you can't go wrong with a guy like Shields this morning. He's my number one guy with salary included across all sites.
Yeah, I'm with you on Shields. I think you make good points about Strasburg and Felix, who have had some games that they've struggled a bit this year. Certainly, the Dodger bats are a lot more intimidating, than the bats in San Diego. San Diego's just been awful. One ranking list I like to look at is kind of a weighted on base average against split-handedness. So against right-handers, San Diego's dead last, 30th in baseball, and it's not even close. They are. Kind of miles behind the Cubs in that regard. They do have the worst strikeout to walk ratio. No power. Of course, they're in the huge park, so basically everything working for Shields and against San Diego. And I think you could make an argument that Shields is the number one pitcher regardless of salary. I know I'm going to be rostering him on every side I play, on pretty much every roster. I think he'll be very popular, but with Felix and Strasburg at the top, and some other guys down below Shields, he won't be 100% owned or anything close to that. So I think there's a lot of value out there today, and I think we'll see some varying rosters, which you don't always see with 5 games, but I think we will today. One thing that scares me about Felix, Oakland's offense has been pretty good. Looking at the rankings, I have them fourth against right-handed pitching. Not striking out very much, just 17% of the time, walking 12% of the time. So they do have the best, walk to strikeout ratio in all of baseball against right-handed pitching. And then the wind in Oakland is kind of scary, blowing out, to center field, right center field at 18 miles per hour. So a few good things working against Felix there, and of course the A's, a lot of their bats have faced Felix a number of times, so they're kind of comfortable with how he pitches, I'd imagine, and with his repertoire, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's all exactly right in line with what I was thinking. And so, you get into a situation where some guys they like to go anti-grain, when they're playing
Yeah.
big tournaments, which is definitely a viable strategy. So
hmm
if you know going into today that you're going to have a lot of guys on Strasburg, there's going to be a ton of guys on Shields, maybe a few guys on Felix, and how are you going to go against the grain? I'm looking possibly in that very same game. I'm looking at Andrew Kashner. The one thing that jumped out to me this morning when I looked at everything was the fact that that game, you're never going to find a game. I mean, very, very rarely will you ever find a game in Vegas where the over-under is lower than 6, and this is at 6 right now. That's as low as you get. That means that they're not projecting any offense in this game at all.
Yeah.
And if it's a two-way street there. Not only is San Diego bad on offense, and Shields has a good. Cashner's been extremely good at it. He's had some shutdown performances. Kansas City isn't. They're not world beaters on offense by any stretch of the
No.
imagination. And if somehow they muster up a run or two for Cashner, he could get one of those 7 or 8 inning shutout innings with a win under his belt, and he'd be even better. He'd be the best pitcher on the board. So if you're going against the grain, Cashner might be the guy you look at too. So that's pretty much. I mean, those guys we mentioned, plus maybe a Garrett Cole, if you want to go that direction, are the guys you got to be looking at this morning.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Obviously Vegas, they're basically projecting, a similar amount of runs allowed, from Cashner as they are Shields. I'm seeing chatter, on the show here in chat that people think, everyone's going to be on James Shields. I think a lot of people will be. Certainly, it's usually never as high as you kind of imagine. That's one thing I've learned playing daily fantasy is that the players you pick, you think everyone's going to have them because they make sense to you. They make sense to the research you've been doing, but not everyone's doing the same research. Not everyone's thinking the same thing. So usually, players aren't quite as highly owned as I think they're going to be. I think they're so obvious to me, but not everyone's thinking the same thing. So, normally I go with the guys that I think are going to do well. But I think you make a great point. I do think Shields will be the most heavily owned pitcher, and on a site like FanDuel, of course, if you go Shields, you can't go Cashner. So going against the grain there could be a good move. The one thing that does scare me, though, the Royals, for the second straight year, are striking out, pretty much the fewest amount of times in all of Major League Baseball, definitely against right-handed pitchers, just 14.5%. So I think that limits Cashner's upside a little bit. Cashner's not generating a ton of swinging strikes. So I don't know, if he has a huge game in him. He certainly seems to. His stuff looks really good. and if he's got it going on, I don't doubt that he could strike out 8, 9, 10 Royals. But I'm not sure if that's like the most likely thing to happen. So I'm just a little bit bearish on Cashner because of that, but certainly I think he's a good play. I'll mention one more starting pitcher before we move on here. I do like Zach Wheeler against Miami a little bit. Nice big ballpark for him. And Miami can be a little bit strikeout prone. A guy like Stanton, of course, tremendous power and can go yard against anyone at any time, but he is striking out over 30% of the time against right-handed pitching. Wheeler is certainly a power pitcher who could, in theory, shut down Stanton. So I think he's an option. Have you looked at Wheeler at all? Am I crazy to look to him with so many aces on the board?
I don't think you're crazy. I'm probably not a guy who's going to end up in my lineups because there's so many, good pitchers going already. But here's the one thing I caution about Wheeler, and just the reason I really couldn't take him today is I don't know what they're doing in Miami, but for some reason Miami at home is just crushing the ball this year, man. And I don't, there's some talk of some things going on there, some, I don't know, not illegal, but maybe in baseball terms, some immoral stuff going on. I don't know. Okay. But they're crushing the ball at home, man. And I kind of learned my lesson after the first few games. I was I was taking the pitchers going against Miami because it is a big ballpark, and their offense on paper doesn't look great outside of Stanton.
Yep.
And they just continue to do it, man. So that's the one thing that keeps me away from Wheeler is Miami's got this big blow-up potential at home, and I'm avoiding them until they kind of simmer down and then come back down to the mean and start to suck again.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, if you just look at WOBA rankings against right-handed pitching, they are second in all of baseball. Now, they do have some underlying statistics that make me think that may be unsustainable. It's mostly driven by a 343 batting average on balls in play. So certainly they're not going to maintain that all year long. It's not like they have a ton of speedy guys who can beat out hits. Certainly Stanton will have a high batting average on balls in play. He just hits the ball so hard. Casey McGee swinging a good bat. Yelich hits a lot of line drives. So I do believe it will be higher than average, but it's not going to be way above everyone else in baseball all season long. Certainly a lot of power from them though. So anytime Giancarlo's in the lineup, he can put 3 up on the board real quick if you just give up a couple hits before him. So he's scary. But I do like Wheeler a good bit. I like his strikeout potential today. Probably more for GPPs, but I think he makes a decent kind of off-the-board play. I think we're probably safe to move over to catcher unless there's anyone else you want to mention as starting pitcher.
No, we covered all the good ones.
Yeah, I'm with you. Let's jump over to catcher where, to me there's not a clear number one option. Obviously, with so many good starting pitching going, it's kind of hard to find good bats because a lot of them are neutralized by the pitcher. I guess my number one guy would probably be Jonathan Lucroy going up against Bronson Arroyo in that nice ballpark in Milwaukee. Is he someone you're looking at, or are you looking elsewhere?
Yeah, there's nobody that I'm looking at this morning that I've identified as a must-play at catcher.
Yeah.
There's a couple good guys, and Lucroy would be one of them. Although in my lineups this morning he won't be in there just because the price is, it's not too high, but it's high enough to where I'll look elsewhere. And Lucroy's a guy I pretty much, on a nightly basis, when I look at the matchups, I usually only play Lucroy if there's a lefty on the mound. That when there's a righty on there, I kind of look elsewhere. I don't.
Yeah.
Of course, he has his games where he hits righties, but I'm just trying to play the general stats where usually against the righties he's just not as good. So I kind of look elsewhere whenever I see that he's facing a righty, even though Arroyo's not good. I mean, Milwaukee's a team you're going to target a few times today. Yeah. So he's on the list. Probably if I had to go, my best catcher on the board, not worrying about price. Probably at this point from the lineups I've seen put out, I'd probably go Montero. And I know Peralta is a tough pitcher most of the time, but you always got to like a catcher, man, who bats cleanup or better. 3, 4, or 5, and that's a good spot for a catcher. Most catchers are down in the number 8 spot. So he's, anytime he faces a righty, he's got potential. It's a small park, like you said, and he's batting cleanup in a fairly decent lineup, so it kind of puts him up on the board already. And there's just not that many options this morning at catcher, and that's pretty much the only reason why he's in consideration. So
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I like him a lot there too. Going up against a righty, he's been swinging a good bat, and he was a guy that was a really kind of a top hitting catcher for a number of years though, and then kind of fell off last year and maybe a little bit the year before too. But seems like he's reemerged. If you've watched him play, he looks like he looks good. So I'm definitely on Montero. Buster Posey. I'm not really on him. Is he even in the lineup? No, he's not. So not an option there. Normally a top catcher. Who else are you looking at besides Lucroy, Montero? Are there any kind of punt plays that you might throw in your rosters?
Yeah, I'll tell you the punt play I would go with, and it's a guy who I was contemplating mentioning as a pitcher actually, because he's a fairly decent pitcher and the offense is not that good of an offense. But if I'm gonna punt, I'm looking at a guy like Anthony Recker, batting seventh today. First of all, you have to confirm that your catcher's in the lineup on a day game because a lot of these starters are going to be resting, day after night like that. So he's a guy, he's in there, he's batting seventh. The guy's got potential. He's got a pretty good stick. And even though Kohler's a pretty good pitcher, man, I'm not underestimating. He has his games where he's not on and he gives up a lot of runs. Recker's just solid. If you're not on Recker, from the things I've seen so far, you got guys like Jeff Mathis and Chris Stewart out there, and those just aren't. I want a guy with a little bit of potential. You want to punt and give me something, some kind of records at least got home run potential. These other guys are pretty much just a straight up punt, and you're just hoping not to get a -1 out of them. Record, outside of the guys batting 3 and 4 like Lucroy and Montero, Record would be my punt, even though he's not exactly an entirely punt price. He's fair. He's low enough though that he'd be considered my punt.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Catcher's often tough on short slates on day games. A lot of the top guys are resting, and they're kind of scrubs come in, and you don't want to really roster those guys. I mean, first of all, backup catchers usually pretty much are horrible hitters, and then beyond that, they might get pinch hit for if the game's close late. So I really don't want to roster those guys if I can avoid it. And I think it's a good day to pay up for Lucroy or Montero. One guy I think you could consider, Hector Sanchez, hitting 5th for the Giants in place of Buster Posey. He is a switch hitter, so he will get to hit from the left side against Garrett Cole, who has struggled this year a little bit against left-handed batters. So not a great hitter, but just 2.5K on DraftKings, and I'll pull up his price here on FanDuel. It's probably pretty low. 2.9, so not a great price on FanDuel. I think Lucroy is the same price, who I would definitely lean that way. But on DraftKings at 2.5K, I think he makes a decent punt option.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that pretty much covers catcher. Again, not a ton of great options. Certainly don't want to really go against Jazo against Felix. So that covers catcher. Let's move over to first base. Always a fun position to talk about. Who are you looking at as your number one guy? I mean, Adrian Gonzalez been absolutely killing right-handers this year, but I don't know if I can roster him against Strasburg.
No.
Yeah.
I'm avoiding the Strasburg fee. I might not be taking those guys as my as my money pitchers.
Right.
I'm definitely not playing anybody against guys like Felix and Strasburg. But when I'm looking at first base, you know what, the expensive guys, they're just not doing it for me today. Like either they've got that tough matchup or there's just something about them that's not good. I've got a few guys who are a little bit lower that I'll be rolling out this morning, and I think as far as value is concerned, my number one guy at first base is Lyle Overbay. He's batting cleanup this morning. He's got a super low price on both of the major sites. Arroyo's a guy I'm going to be targeting going against today.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I don't put a whole lot of merit into 10 at-bats, but if you just need something to push you over the top, he is 5 out of 10 against Arroyo in his career, which is very small sample size. But, when you're punting, I don't want to call it a punt because punt is kind of saying that you don't expect anything out of him. I expect something out of Overbay. But if you're going that cheap and you're looking for a reason to do it, 5 out of 10 is just something to kind of helps push you over the top. Lyle Overbay will probably be my best value at first base today.
Yeah, I'm on him too. 3.1 on DraftKings, 2.4 on FanDuel. So really good price. And you mentioned that batter versus pitcher statistic. 5 out of 10. You can't put a ton of merit into that, but you'd certainly rather have him be 5 out of 10 than 0 out of 10. So on a day, with not a lot of great choices, it's a positive in his favor. It certainly is. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm with you. A lot of the top guys, not great matchups. One guy I am looking kind of closely at, Adam LaRoche, against Dan Heron, who Heron can be pretty good, but also, homer prone, can get hit around a little bit. And LaRoche has been hitting right-hander pitching really well. He does have a big platoon split in his career, so if you do want to pay up for first base, I think LaRoche could be a good option. Give me another couple guys that maybe you're looking at, if you're looking to make multiple rosters and don't want to put Overby on every team.
Yeah, well, yeah, LaRoche was definitely in my top 3. As far as Heron, I mean, I guess we'll get into more Washington guys later. But as far as first base, there was Overbay, there's LaRoche, and probably the third guy on my list that I'd be playing this morning is Garrett Jones.
Yeah.
Even though Wheeler, you mentioned Wheeler, he has the potential to pitch a good game, but I like Garrett Jones moving up a spot to number 5. He's cheap, and just anytime he's up in that order against a right-hander, he's a threat. And on a day like today, when you really can't spend the money on Gonzalez, and I'm probably not going to go out and spend a ton of money on Goldschmidt and guys like that.
Yeah.
Garrett Jones is a guy I wouldn't mind playing as my third or fourth option at first base, if I couldn't afford some of the other guys.
Yeah, I got no problem with him. I do see an interesting question in chat. I think this pertains to FanDuel. Detroit Colts 44 asks, 2,400 for Overbay or 2,900 for Mark Reynolds. I think that's at least worth discussing.
Yeah, for me, it's going to be Overbay. I mean, they're both, one guy's batting 4th, one guy's batting 5th. That's not a big deal. But just in general, I like Overbay's game a little bit better. Reynolds is, I mean, if you're playing a GPP, there's probably no better guy to go with than Mark Reynolds. The guy can go out there and blast 3 home runs. That's what he does.
Right.
Downside is he also can go out there and get you 4 strikeouts real easy,
Oh, yeah.
So I'd probably just, if I'm playing like cash games and money on the line, real money on the line, I'll probably go with Overbay. He's got more likely to go out there and get you some kind of positive points, and
yep.
That's kind of what you need in those kind of games.
Yeah, Reynolds certainly a kind of an ultimate GPP play. He's like kind of like a Dan Ugla type where he's going to get you, the FanDuel -1 a lot, or the goose egg on DraftKings. But when he has that good game, he can kind of propel you to GPP. Glory. So, yeah. A couple more guys at first base I think are options. Brandon Belt, hitting 3rd for the Giants. Hasn't been, swinging a super hot bat. I think he might have had a good night last night. Good couple nights in a row. So he's heating up a little bit. 3.6K on DraftKings. That's a nice price for him. And I mentioned Garrett Cole. Good young pitcher for sure. Hasn't been quite as effective against lefties. So I think Belt could be in play. And then one more guy, Justin Smoke. He's quietly having a pretty solid season and does swing the bat pretty well from the left side. I mentioned the wind is blowing out in Oakland, so I think he's got a decent matchup up against Dan Straley. So either of those guys you're on, I think they're the same price on DraftKings. They're pretty close to it. Who would you prefer of Belt and Smoke if you were going to kind of take an off-the-board first base play?
Out of those two guys, I'd probably lean Belt just because his season so far this year has been very shockingly good. I mean, I knew he was a good hitter and he was going to do well, but he's kind of gone above what I thought he was going to be this year. So just based on what he's done this year, with everything else being equal in the matchups or whatever for me, I'd go with Belt.
Yep. I'm leaning Belt there too. I do think Smoke will be underlooked. He's not a player people like to roster, but the kind of my metrics are showing that he is a pretty good hitter against right-handed pitchers this year. So he did come up with some pedigree. I believe he used to play for the Rangers, so got traded to Seattle and then kind of struggled a little bit. But he's been better, and I think he could be a decent option, against Dan Straley, who's certainly not a shutdown pitcher. Let's jump over to second base at this point. Again, I kind of think there's a top number one option, a familiar name, Robinson Cano. I don't know if I want to pay the full price for him. You think you're paying up for Cano today, or are you going to look elsewhere?
Oh man, that's a tough one. By saying I won't pay up for him doesn't mean that I don't like Cano. He's definitely
Yeah,
at the top of the list. The only thing that would deter me is the salary, and so, but the salary's not that bad when you compare it to the other guys that you have to choose from. He's up there, man. He's definitely a guy I'll be considering. He's one of the few guys I'm considering at second base. So he's definitely got. Anytime Cano's another one. Anytime he's facing a right-hander, you've got to have him on your list. He's got to be on the short list, man, of top plays at second base. So he's definitely on there.
yeah. Does he even have a home run yet?
I'm not sure. I don't think he does though. But then again, neither did Beltre until last night. So this may be
Yeah,
maybe his big shot right here.
it looks like he does have one home run. I've been I was pretty low on him entering the season. He signed that huge contract out in Seattle, left the Yankees. He kind of seems like a guy who thrives, in the big environment in New York with the pressure. Obviously, the ballpark in New York is much more favorable to hitters, and actually, frankly, most of the AL East ballparks are much better to hit in than the West Coast, which kind of notoriously tough, on batters. But I think today, even though Oakland is a big park, the wind is blowing out, and it is a little bit easier to hit out there, during the daytime than it is at night. Pretty warm today, in the low 60s. So, I do think Cano's in a pretty good spot, and he'd definitely be my number one, second baseman on the board. I just not sure I want to pay for him. Who else are you looking at second base if you don't want to pay up for Cano?
Well, I don't know about the salary being that much of a disparity, but if I'm not using Cano, probably the number one guy on my board is going to be Anthony Rendon.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, the thing about Dan Herron is he's real similar to Aaron Harang in the fact that eventually the other shoe is going to drop on him, and he's been real good this year, just like Harang was. And I don't know where it's coming from because everything in the past couple years has said that he's on the downslide of his career.
yeah,
All of a sudden, so far this year, he's kind of re-energized. But just like Harang got lit up the other day in Miami, I think eventually here, Heron, the same thing's going to happen to Heron, and I wouldn't doubt if it's today. Rendon's been on fire, man, for pretty much
yeah.
the entire year. And, he's in the lineup today, batting second. He's got a decent salary. He's just a tick under Cano, so you can save a little bit of money if you have to. And I just think eventually Heron's going to get lit up, and I want to be on the train when it happens.
Yeah, Heron's a guy that his advanced metrics usually look pretty good. Doesn't walk anyone. Strikes out a fair number of people, but he kind of does it, via deception, not great stuff. And when he can't locate, when his fastball's not moving, man, he can get hit really hard. Teams can really string some hits together. He is homer prone, so I'm with you. Rendon's been swinging a really good bat, and I'm pretty high on him overall. I think he's going to be he's a good young hitter. He looks really good. Takes the ball the other way, hits the gaps, and can poke one out of the yard from time to time. So I'm with you there. Another guy I'm looking at, I think he'll be a little bit off the board. Kyle Seager has been heating up, kind of a right-handed pitching masher, and I do like the Mariners' left-handed bats a good bit with the wind blowing out against Dan Straley. So on DraftKings at least, you can play him at second base instead of Cano, which I think would be kind of sneaky. I think most people in GPPs will, if they're going to take a Mariners second baseman, will go Cano over Seager. Is he someone you're looking at all?
At this point, he's not going to be on any of my rosters. I definitely understand the thinking on
Yeah,
that. I mean, obviously, he's shown in this past 2 weeks that he's one of those guys who's a multi-homer threat.
yeah,
Anybody who has the ability to multi-homer in the game has to be, on your list for GPP plays. It's just that today there's that I kind of like this position is kind of stacked for me, man. And this is the one spot where I'm finding a lot of guys I want to play, and so I got to narrow it down. And he's just not going to make the cut for me, but I definitely see where it's coming from.
yeah. It sounds like you've got a few other options on your mind. So why don't you talk to us about one or two more guys that you're looking at?
Well, I think everybody's favorite play right now, or at least until the salary increased a little bit
Oh yeah,
recently, was Scooter Jeanette, and I'm going to
yeah,
pick on Arroyo all day today. It's going to
yep,
be a theme because I don't believe in him at all. So Jeanette, he's up there. He's batting second today again, so he's confirmed in there. He's got a good spot in the lineup. It's a good matchup. It's a good park. His price is a pretty substantial amount below Cano and Rendon, so you're saving money there. He's just in a good spot. I mean, he's been popular. He's a popular pick, and he will be again today. But he brings a lot to the table, man. He saves you money, and he's been just as productive recently as any of the top names. So he's a guy that's on my list. And after that, a guy who's swinging a hot bat lately, Neil Walker. He's in the Rendon range as far as price on both the major sites. So you're not saving anything on him, but I'm just going with sheer, you know, a hot streak right now is what I'm going to
yeah,
ride. Lincecum is not. Boy, Lince is just he's fallen off the last few years, and
yeah.
that's just the way it is. He's not the same dominant pitcher. Yeah, he can always go out there and get you, 7 innings and not give up any runs and strike out 8 guys. He has that potential, but he gets hit a lot more than he gets hit a lot more than he pitches well these days. It seems like so.
Yeah.
And Walker in the past week and a half or so, Neil Walker's just been on fire, and he's confirmed number 2 hitter in the lineup, and so I have no problems paying up for Neil Walker either today.
Yeah, I think he's in a good spot. You mentioned Lincecum. The name is scary, so I think maybe some people, new players, they might not want to roster Pirates, but man, Lincecum gives up a lot of home runs. He gets hit really hard sometimes. That fastball is pretty straight, and if he's not fooling people, man, he can sure give them up. So I think he's kind of a good player to target. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to be on Pirates today, but I think guys like Walker, we'll get to some other guys in their lineup. But I like a good number of Pirates actually today against Lincecum. I think they're in pretty good spots. And I will mention the left-handed bats. Pittsburgh, kind of a sneaky bad park for right-handed bats. By the data that I look at, it is the hardest park in Major League Baseball to hit home runs in for right-handed batters. So that's something to keep in mind. Lefties, it's not so tough, though. So I think those guys are in play. One more guy I'll mention, a guy I roster quite a bit. Daniel Murphy hitting second for the Mets against Tom Kaler, however you pronounce it. I think he's in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, he's definitely up there for me. I agree.
Yeah, so a lot of options at second base, really, and a lot of directions you can go. I think we'll see a lot of variation among rosters at that position. So it'll be interesting to see, how it all pans out. Top guys, and then guys in the middle, and then if you want to punt the position, there's, guys available, down at the bottom too. Derek Dietrich hitting second for the Marlins against Wheeler. Not a bad spot there either. With that, we'll jump over to third base. On DraftKings, at least, you could. Well, I mentioned I do like the Pittsburgh left-handed bat, so I think Pedro Alvarez is a pretty good threat to go deep for you today against Lincecum. So those are 2 guys that I'm looking at. Give me a couple guys that you're looking at third base.
Yeah, I mean Pedro is my number 1 option today.
Yeah.
And yeah, as far as third base, to me it's a lot less crowded of a field than second base. So this is the spot where I might whip out Kyle Seager and use him at third base instead of second base. But, you have that option on some sites, so that's always good for the flexibility. Aramis Ramirez, solid against Arroyo. And like I said, there's just not a lot of options. So outside of Pedro as my number 1, if I'm going to spend up, David Wright. I might think about David Wright batting third today. I'm not entirely sold on him, but he's always, he's one of those guys. If he doesn't hit you a home run, he can still have a monster game because when he gets on, he looks to steal bases. So Wright would definitely be, I got 4 guys I'm looking at, and I just mentioned them: Wright, Alvarez, Seager, Aramis. And I put Pedro at number 1, Seager at number 2, and Ramirez number 3, and Wright number 4. I think they're all viable. If I'm going with anybody though, I'm spending on Pedro today against. I mean, he's seven at bats is like nothing. I agree with that, but at least he's had some success in 7 at bats on Lincecum. he's as good now as he's ever been in his career, and
Yeah.
Lincecum is as bad now as he's ever
Yep.
been in his career. So if that has anything to do with it, then and plus he's a guy who just he's one of those multi-homer threat guys. There's not a whole lot of guys out there who have the threat to walk out on the field that day and hit multiple homers, but he's one of them, and he's done it in the past. So he's probably my number one option.
Yeah, I'm with you there on Pedro, and I think you bring up a good point about the BVP Pedro versus Lincecum. Certainly, one problem with that stat is that it can bring up kind of irrelevant history where maybe the pitcher is different than he was or the hitter is different than he was. In this case, though, I think you made the great point that Pedro, is still growing up, still becoming a better hitter. Probably at kind of the peak of his career right now. That peak might get higher, but I don't know if it's ever been higher than it is. And Lincecum, he's on the downside, kind of losing his heat. Just not the pitcher that he used to be. So in this case, I do think you can put merit, into that small sample size of batter versus pitcher stats because one person's on the rise and one's on the fall, and it's matches up pretty well for Pedro there.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll correct right now is I'm hearing that Ramirez is not in the lineup, so
Yeah.
that oversight on my part. We'll get rid of him. I mean, those other three guys are pretty clear head and shoulders above everybody else, in my opinion. Though I don't, if you're gonna look elsewhere, I just don't see the need to. If you are, and you're strapped for cash or something, a guy like Eric Chavez might be a guy you look at who's he's always a threat against right-handed pitchers, and it's a small ballpark. So other than that, though, I mean, I think it's really set at third base on Pedro and Seager and maybe Wright if you want to mix in David Wright.
Yeah, Wright's interesting. Hasn't been great so far this year, if we're completely honest. Hasn't shown a ton of power. I think he might just have the one home run. And you do like to get him when you can against left-handed pitchers. He does have a pretty big split, but I do think he'll be under-owned. And Tom Kohler, like you mentioned, decent pitcher. When he's got it going on, but we don't know if that's going to be the case today. So I do think Wright could be kind of a sneaky off-the-board play if you wanted to go that direction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's not. Listen, David Wright's not. He's not setting my world on fire. I'm just. That's my third option. It's a distant third, with Ramirez out. So I'd pretty much, if you're listening out there and the honest opinion is Pedro and Seager are head and shoulders above anybody at this position, in my opinion, this morning.
Yep, I'm with you there. So sounds like we're on the same page at third base. We'll jump over to shortstop at this point. Another position that's pretty tough. I'm looking at some guys I really usually like. Jed Lowry against Felix. Not really a fan of that matchup. He does have a nice price on DraftKings, but I still don't know if I'm going to go that way. And then Hanley Ramirez and D. Gordon, two guys you can play either one at shortstop on DraftKings, but I don't think I'm going to go there against Steven Strasburg. So that kind of eliminates the guys that I would normally look at shortstop. So I'm interested to hear, who you're looking at because I'm having some trouble here.
Yeah, shortstop's a tough spot this morning, but I guess the first guy I'd get off the board is Ian Desmond. He's a solid hitter, and I'm going to go back to the Heron thing again. I'm not sold on Heron. I think Washington can hit him today. Obviously, Washington's a team I really like when they're facing left-handers. They don't get that today, but Heron's probably as good as you can get without being a left-hander. I think he's going to get lit up today. In this field right here with not many options, Ian Desmond is probably going to be my number one overall option with salary and everything taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Another guy that I can consider, and I wish he was batting higher in the batting order today, is Gene Segura. They got him down in the 7th spot, but tell you what, he finally seems like he's snapping out of that slump he was in to start the year. He's producing a little bit lately, and it's some thin options out there, and we're going to go against Arroyo one more time here. So those are probably my top two guys right there.
Yeah, Segura's got a pretty nice price tag, at least over on DraftKings. Just 3.5K. Hard to argue with that. I believe he did hit a home run last night. So if you believe in the hot hand, the hot bat, a good option. And he's a talented young player. And again, I don't think you can go wrong basically at any position picking against Arroyo. I do believe that's kind of the way to go as far as a pitcher to target. That ballpark in Milwaukee is pretty nice to hit in, and the Brewers, pretty much 1 through 7 at least. They got some pop. So I like the Brewers a lot, and I like the Segura pick. Is D. Gordon a guy you've been rostering a lot? I know I talk about him a lot. I kind of believe in his emergence. We do have a little bit of time here, so give me some thoughts on D. Gordon. Do you think he can keep up this torrid pace that he's on?
Well, no, there's no way he's going to keep this up, but he's definitely a guy I've been rostering lately just because he just produces, man. I mean, he produces points as if he's hitting home runs, but he's not. He's doing it strictly with steals and scoring runs in that high-powered offense. He's just a solid player, man. To be in that leadoff spot right now, he's just, he's getting on base, and once he gets on base, he's almost like an automatic steal these days. And they have the hitters behind him to get him home. Though that's a bonus right there when you can score that many runs, So yeah, he's definitely a guy I've been rostering, and I'll continue to roster until he starts to fall off a little bit. When that happens, I don't think he's going to be a 400 hitter this year, or I don't think he's going to hit lefties,
right,
as good as he has so far. There's a lot of things about him that are going to slip back down, but as of right now, he's producing, and I like to ride the hot hand, and he's definitely one of the hotter ones out there. So, I'm not going to hesitate now. Of course, today, I'm probably not a guy I want to touch, but then again, there's not a whole lot of options out there at shortstop. So I wouldn't hurt any, because Strasburg's one of those guys. What is Strasburg going to do? D. Gordon can put up a monster game without actually getting an extra base hit.
Right.
So that kind of plays into his hands against Strasburg. All he needs to do is get on base against the right-hander, and he can steal a base. Maybe he can steal 2 bases, and if he scores a run, all of a sudden he could be the highest scoring player on the Dodgers today, and he didn't even get an extra base hit.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a sneaky GPP play. Just he's kind of an automatic steal attempt anytime he reaches first base, but against Strasburg, the Dodgers are gonna, more than likely, unless Strasburg is off his game, in which case, that would be good for Gordon anyway. But if Strasburg is on his game, anytime Gordon reaches base, he's going to try to steal. They're going to try to push a run across if it's a close game. So I do think he could be sneaky. Those steals are worth a lot in daily fantasy. I think they're a little bit, overweighted in terms of how much they actually help a team win and how many points, they help you win in DFS. But the scoring is what it is, and it's really, anytime you get those steals, your player is going to have a good game, because that means he got on base. He's likely to score then. And I really like to go after those steals. I like to target pitchers that give them up. And I could see Gordon, if he gets on, I definitely do think he will take off, for second base, and who knows, maybe even third. Well, so I do think he's an option. Anyone else at shortstop you're looking at before we move on to the outfield?
Well, just to the Gordon point real quick, like when you're dealing with a guy whose main production comes from stolen bases, there are certain situations you don't want to take him. You don't want to take him when he's going up against, I don't really care who the pitcher is. You kind of don't want to take him when he's going up against Yadier Molina or somebody like that who's going to just shut down the running game. But today, if you're dealing with Gordon and you're looking for stolen bases as your primary source of points, they've got Wilson Ramos back at catcher, coming off an injury, first game. They might look to attack him. So it's one of those things, man. You look at the end of the day and you don't think the matchup is good, but a guy like Gordon can put up 8 or 9 points on FanDuel just strictly with his base running today. So I wouldn't hesitate.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely wouldn't recommend him for cash games by any means, but I do think he could be a pretty good GPP play. He's, it's funny. You don't think of players like Gordon who can't really hit home runs, doesn't hit many extra base hits, but he is actually kind of a boom or bust play because, Billy Hamilton's the same way. If they get on base, they're probably going to have a pretty nice game because they're going to run, they might score, but the problem for them is just getting to first base. You can't steal first base, and so they do have. It hasn't happened to Gordon yet, but I do think it will. Those 0 for 4 games pretty often.
Yep. I mean, it's a thin position, so
Yeah.
roll him out if you want to.
All right. I think that pretty much wraps up shortstop. We'll move over to the outfield, where always kind of the most fun position to talk about. Always tons of options. Obviously, you got to fill at least 3 spots on every single site. Talk to me about who you're looking at, who's your number one guy, and then any good value options that you think you could help fill out your roster.
Yes, outfielder and first base are always the toughest to pick in daily fantasy because there's so many options at both those positions. And even though you get 3 outfielders, it's still very, very difficult to limit it down to 3. The studs today, like high price but big producers, you always got to keep in mind Stanton, Giancarlo Stanton. He's one of those guys. And Wheeler, he's an all right guy, but Stan's definitely got to be on the board. McCutchen, we've mentioned Lincecum and his problems, and so McCutchen is on my list. Carlos Gomez, I'm going back to the Arroyo train again, and Gomez is like as sneaky of a fantasy stud as there is out there. He gets more attention for his
antics,
demeanors out there than he does for his production. But man, this guy produces. So Gomez is those are probably my stud guys, but my number one play overall with value considered and the lineups being out and everything is going to be Travis Snyder. You can get the guy for an incredibly cheap price across the industry, and they bumped him up to the number 1 spot in the order today.
Yeah.
That's definitely a big time boon to his production. And he gets Lincecum, and Lincecum is just not, it's just not impressing me. So I'm viewing Lincecum as a guy I want to target, and if I'm going to target him, why not take a leadoff hitter who has power also, and he's facing a righty. Anytime Snyder faces a righty, he's in play anyway. So he's my number 1 value guy today, is Snyder.
Yeah, I think he's a really good option. You love him hitting leadoff. I don't know how much speed he has, if he can really take off and steal a base. I'll pull up his stats here quick and find out. But you got to love him out of that leadoff hole against Lincecum. Sounds like we're both kind of targeting Timmy when we can. Snyder, yeah, he steals a bag or two, but not really a speed guy, more of a power guy. The one thing I do worry about with Snyder, and I'm interested to hear if this is something you take into consideration, he could be pinch hit for, 7th, 8th inning if they bring in a tough lefty. I think he does have a pretty big platoon split. So is that something you consider, when picking your teams? I know the A's are kind of the king of that, and the Rays a little bit too.
Yeah, there's certain teams out there and certain players where it definitely comes into play. I mean, right offhand, Mike Morris, it seems like Mike Morris, they get into like the 6th inning, and if they have a 1 or 2 run lead, he's out of the game. They're going to replace him for defense, because he runs now like he has 2 bad knees, and that's a guy like that, yeah. And there's some other guys like Baker down in Miami who kills lefties. Well, once the lefty is out of the game, they usually pinch hit for him.
Yep.
There's some guys like that around the league. Schneider is more of a once they put him in the starting lineup for the day, he usually finishes out the game. He's going to struggle against lefties if that happens, but really, you should be able to get, if you only get 2 at-bats against Lincecum, then that probably means, in my opinion, I think it means maybe you hit him and he's out of the game by the 5th or 6th inning, which is a good thing. That means you hit him. If he's going to get 3 at-bats against Lincecum,
right,
well, that's all you can really ask for anyway, So, yeah, a guy like Snyder, that platoon thing's not really going to hurt me too much. Now, there's guys around the league that I would definitely, when I see their name on the board in the starting lineup, I don't even look their way because I know I'm probably only going to get 5 or 6 innings out of them, and I don't want to go that route. But Snyder's not one of them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I'm interested also. One thing that I've been kind of toying with, in my projection systems, do you give, like for me, I worry more about a guy getting pinch hit for late in a game on a site like DraftKings where you can't go negative. On DraftStreet and FanDuel, where you do get negative points for outs, and especially on DraftStreet where you get a big negative for a strikeout. It's not always the worst thing in the world, if your guy gets pinch hit for, especially because, on DraftStreet where you get the huge, minus 0.75 points for a strikeout. usually they're pinch hit in a spot that they're not likely to succeed in anyway. But on DraftKings, where you can't go negative, you can only get positive points. I really want those guys that are going to be in there the whole game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point as far as that goes to a whole different level of thinking. Is like, uh, I definitely don't factor it into my projections as like a real spreadsheet like you got, but it's in the back of my mind. It's not just the negative points, yeah, but it's more like I look at bullpens also. Like when that starting
Yeah.
pitcher is out, who are these guys going to be facing?
Yep.
Because there's a chance you're going to get a couple of at bats against the bullpen, and when you come in with a bullpen that's lights out, even though the starting pitcher might not look that good that day, you got kind of have to think about those last couple of at bats and who it's going to be against. And then you got on the flip side, you get guys, bullpens who are just atrocious that you want to target for stacks. That's always a good way to go about it. So that's definitely looking into the game. You got to take those things into account. But as far as the platoon thing,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I lost my train of thought because I saw a DB down there, but it's all good.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I mean,
No, you're right about the whole looking forward to the negative points and all that. It's definitely a forward way of thinking, and not a lot of people think of that. But glance at the bullpens, man, and how tough the bullpens are whenever you're putting together your team, and just think about the guy's first 2, maybe 3 at bats is against a starting pitcher. But once that's over with, what's he going to be looking at?
yep, I think that's really the bullpen strength is an important thing to take into consideration. It's one thing that I can myself I know I need to work on where I rely so heavily on lefty righty splits versus the starting pitcher, but sometimes half the at bats, usually at least a quarter of the at bats do come against the bullpen, especially when you consider that if all your at bats are coming against the starter anyway, your player probably didn't have a very good game. If the starter's in there, in the 7th, 8th, and 9th inning. But especially when you're stacking up teams or making mini stacks, for those stacks to be successful, that means that they're pretty much going to knock the starter out early in the game. So at that point, then you're getting into the bullpen where you're going to get half your at bats against the team's bullpen, and it's certainly a good move to look at the strength of that bullpen, and in particular, at least for stacks, I think it's good to look at who the long men are out of the bullpen. They're not going to face the closer, in the scenario where your team is in contention. So look at who they might face and if that pitcher is any good.
I agree, man, 100%.
All right, that pretty much covers. Well, I guess we didn't really go over all the outfielders. I think Carlos Gomez is certainly in play. Again, I'm with you. I think he flies under the radar, but just produces, capable of huge games. I think Giancarlo Stanton, always a great GPP play with his considerable power. What about any cheap guys? I do think there are a number of cheap guys out there. You mentioned Travis Snyder. I'll throw out Gregor Blanco, leading off for the Giants. Minimum price on both FanDuel and DraftKings, 2.2K. A guy that can steal a base, do some things. So I think he could be in a good option. And give me just 1 or 2 more outfielders that you like, and then maybe we can jump into chat and answer some questions.
I mean, if we're going really cheap in the outfield, I look at Caleb Gendel from Milwaukee. He's in the six hole. He's minimum salary going against Arroyo again. 6th spot in the order, in my estimation, is not that bad. I definitely want to avoid the 8th and 9th hitters and usually the 7th hitter, but 6 is not that bad. So you got a guy who's minimum salary batting 6th against Arroyo. That's pretty good deal right there. So I would look at him, and I always target Gerardo Parra. Rico Suave is what I like to call him. But the guy when I always target him when he's leading off and he's up against right-handers, which usually they coincide with each other. Peralta's tough, we said that, but Milwaukee's a good park for hitters. We don't have the issues with any weather, and he's hitting leadoff against a right-hander, and he's definitely his price is pretty good on most sites, so that definitely be a guy I look for.
Yeah, there you go. I'm with you there. I think there are, as always at outfield, a number of good top plays and value plays. It is a position where we see the most, variation among lineups across the DFS site. So a lot of directions you can go. I do like the Mariners lefty bat, so I think you should keep those in consideration. If you don't mind, we'll jump over to draft day and then maybe even Star Street for their kind of pick fives. It's actually called the rapid fire on draft day. We've been talking, FanDuel, DraftKings pricing most of today, so we'll give these sites a little bit of love as well. So I'll load up the rapid fire here, guys. Feel free to pull it up. If you wanna get our picks in, normally they're pretty good. I've had some success in this game. So first matchup of the day. Give me your thoughts on Andrew McCutchen. Going up against Tim Lincecum against Paul Goldschmidt against Estrada.
That's a good matchup. I'd probably lean towards McCutchen, even though in 16 at bats against Lentz, it doesn't look impressive, so a lot of people will be scared off by that. But that was a lot of that was the good Lincecum. This isn't a good Lincecum, and McCutchen's he's prime of his career. Goldschmidt, I love Goldschmidt, don't get me wrong, but I kind of prefer the matchup with Lincecum to the matchup that Goldschmidt has, so I'd go McCutchen.
Yeah, I think that's a close one. I'm with you. That's a good pick by the draft day guys. Pretty close one, but I do think Paul Goldschmidt, more reliant on the home run. McCutchen can get you points in more ways, so I do think, while their average points might be close in this matchup, projected average points, I think McCutchen, wins this more than 50% of the time. So I'm with you. I would lean McCutchen for sure. Next matchup, David Wright against Hanley Ramirez.
You know what? Just strictly based on everything I've said, I definitely can back off, and I'd go right over Hanley. And that's mainly, I like Hanley better as a player usually, but the matchup just dictates Wright today, easy.
Yeah, totally with you there. I don't think it's really tough to pick Hanley Ramirez going up against Strasburg. That's kind of got a 0 for 4 day written all over it. If Strasburg's on his game, Hanley's not going to do anything. So even though I'm with you, I think Hanley, I'd probably pick him more overall, and in a neutral matchup, I would lean Hanley. But I think Wright is kind of an easy pick today. Next one, Christian Yelich against Carl Crawford.
Yelich is a guy that I didn't get to talk about, but he certainly was on my list. I like Yelich. I like him in general as a player. I like his matchup today better than today is a no-brainer, but even on a normal day when the matchups are totally equal and the ballparks are equal and everything, I'd still take Yelich. So I'm definitely taking him today.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy one. Again, Crawford going up against Strasburg, not a fan of that. Yelich, kind of a right-handed pitching masher, hitting leadoff, against Wheeler, who I like, but Yelich is one of the guys I'm fearing in that Marlins lineup. A good young player. I've been impressed by him, so I would definitely lean Yelich there. So far we've got McCutchen over Goldschmidt, Wright over Hanley Ramirez, and Yelich over Carl Crawford. Next one I think is really interesting. Two guys that we both like. Carlos Gomez against Pedro Alvarez.
Man, they made that's the one that's going to make or break you right there, because either one of those guys has the potential to blow up for a huge game, and so that's tough. But if I'm going to take that one, oh man, you know what? Just because Pedro probably relies on the home run a little more, it's probably a lot harder. Gomez can still score points just by getting on base. I'd lean Gomez in this kind of a matchup.
Yeah, I think so too. GPP, I might favor Alvarez, but this is kind of a, rapid fire, pick five is kind of a cash game setup where you just need to beat the other person. Doesn't matter how much you beat them by. So I'm definitely on Team Gomez here. And another one on the left side of the column on rapid fire over at draft day. So McCutchen, Wright, Yelich, Gomez. Last matchup here we have Chris Young for the Mets going up against Tom Kohler. And Garrett Jones, same game, going up against Wheeler. I'm guessing you're on Garrett Jones here. You talked about him a good bit.
Yeah, and I'd lean Garrett Jones, even though the matchup isn't ideal. But Chris Young is, like you said, you're just looking for a guy to outscore the other guy. Who's more likely to outscore the other guy? And the way Chris Young plays, maybe if that was a left-hander on the mound, I might think about Chris Young. But just day in and day out, it seems to me like Garrett Jones is going to beat Chris Young. So today, with the matchups both being similar and everything, in a vacuum, I'd play Garrett Jones.
Yep, with you there. So I think we agree on all five of these. I do think there's quite a bit of value in this rapid fire. So if you want to get their picks in, guys, I know I'm going to certainly play this, for the maximum over at draft day. We have McCutcheon, Wright, Yelich, Gomez, and Garrett Jones. So go ahead and get those picks in. I think there's a good chance that they'll come through for you. With that, our time is up here. We've got 35 minutes before lineup lock. I know you've got lineups to get to. I know I do. It was good to meet you, Chop. I know we've had some interactions on Twitter, on the forums, but never formally met. And I guess this Google Hangout will have to count until we hopefully meet in Atlantis or Vegas at a live final. So good to meet you. Enjoyed doing the show. And any last words for the crowd?
I'm just good luck, man. Get your lineups in, and then when that's done, take a little break for lunch, and then get back on the night grind.
All right, there we have it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and good luck today.